I settled into an overstuffed chair and surveyed the scene. Despite the dancing, the party was still trying to gather some real energy. But Mr. Lancaster, standing off to the side, was like a bucket of cold water on the flames. Then I noticed Benny, my old buddy, sneaking into the living room from the kitchen. He was scanning the room and eventually spotted what he was looking for. He went over to a girl with a long red French braid, and they seemed to know each other. I was sure Benny hadn't come in through the front door while I was dancing, and I'd looked for him when we first arrived. He must have slipped in through the back and into the kitchen. Since his date didn't get him past the hostess, she probably hadn't really invited him. He'd likely told her he was invited to the same party as part of his charm. I smiled to myself. Benny was not only gatecrashing but also lying to his date. Benny, you didn't just bring the rope, you tied it and put the noose around your own neck. Now I just need to get you to throw it over the rafter and climb up on a chair. Ah, sweet revenge. The best thing would be to show Benny up as the liar and flake he is, in front of both the Tolbathy crowd and the kids from Horace Man. But first, I needed to see what I had to work with. As before, it seemed like a good idea at the time, given my recent history with sorcery. That should have been my cue that it was about to go horribly wrong. I squinted and started checking the strings around the party. Bad idea. A room full of teens, many of them new to this scene, under close parental surveillance? The place was a tangled mess of emotional strings. No wonder these things have such a bad reputation with the older folks. Take a handful of adolescent hormones, add some testosterone, sprinkle in some female politicking, throw in a dash of John Hughes movie cliches, and stir it all in a pressure cooker of expectations, pop rock, and rap. Don't serve near an open flame. I shook my head, trying to clear out the overwhelming energy. It was probably best to start with my charming hostess, who should at least know who most of the people in her house were. In theory, anyway. Paris was standing next to the red-headed girl Benny had been looking for. Benny was busy getting himself a plate of food, so I figured I had some time to approach and start laying the groundwork for his fall. I squeezed Griff's shoulder and went over to talk to Paris. She greeted me. Ethan, this is Della, my best friend in the whole world. I guessed the party was going well. Della, this is Ethan, Griff brought her. Della gave me a quick greeting and then glanced over at Griff. I briefly wondered if I had stepped into some convoluted French farce, where ex-best friends become entangled with ex-lovers, but it seemed like just a casual glance, a female reflex of checking out another girl's territory. Then it hit me, this was my opening to mess with Benny. Paris, I asked casually, I don't really know anyone here, should I be careful around anyone? I mean, I don't expect any psychos, but there's always someone in every group, right? Della and Paris exchanged a look and said in unison, Pris. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Paris pointed to a group of girls clustered around the CD player. See the girl with the blue tube top and the red jeans that look like she spray-painted them on? That's Pris Langston. This is the third boarding school she's been kicked out of in the last 5 years. She got expelled from her last school because of a practical joke with a hair conditioner that made a girl's hair fall out completely. I don't know if it grew back. Let's just say Pris has a rather unfortunate sense of humor. Della scrunched her face. That's crap. She's just a bully. She doesn't have the influence or social connections to be a classic bully, so she uses pranks to make everyone miserable. Oh, by the way, Ethan? Do you go to Prothero or Thackford? Prothero and Thackford were the other 2 boarding schools in town. I hoped she wouldn't press for more details about my background. I just wanted to get Benny tonight, and telling a lie would only mess things up. No. My family's just staying in the area. Well, stay away from April, Della warned, pointing to a dark-haired girl in a Durward uniform talking to 2 others. She really doesn't like Boonies. Boonies was a term Paris had picked up from the college crowd to refer to locals, which had unfortunately made its way into the boarding school slang. It doesn't matter what your family does, if you actually live here, you might as well be Ellie Mae Clampett to her. As Paris kept talking, she pointed out a beefy white guy dressed in what I could only describe as suburban gangsta attire, an oversized hoodie, baggy jeans, and way too much attitude. I recoiled when I realized it was Ambrose Washburn, or Buck, one of the guys who'd messed with me in the park last Monday. That's Ambrose Washburn. But you better call him Buck if you don't want him up in your face. We, met briefly. What's his deal, aside from a bad case of testosterone poisoning? Della shrugged. He thinks his clothes give him an excuse to act obnoxious. Like he even needs an excuse. Where are his two buddies? Doug and Donnie? If they aren't here now, they'll be here soon. Buck doesn't do anything without Doug and Donnie backing him up. I smiled, dished a little more, and then returned to Griff for another spin on the dance floor. I had everything I needed now. It was time to put the pieces together. I won't bore you with the logistics of it all. Let's just say it didn't take much manipulation to get Benny exactly where I wanted him. Pris, the practical joker, did most of the work. She was looking for someone to mess with. Better Benny than someone who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. At least he had it coming. I made sure her wandering string accidentally fell on Benny. Getting everyone into position was a bit of a struggle. Working sorcery on the fly isn't my strong suit, and as any RPG game master will tell you, people often do what they want, not what you want. I was running up a karmic tab, hoping it wouldn't come due before I had a chance to make some deposits. Besides, I was with Griff, and I didn't want to be the kind of girl who leaves her date hanging. Finally, Pris had her joke set, and Benny was taking the bait. I leaned against a bookcase, eagerly awaiting the moment when Benny would become the fool for once. Then, I heard Mr. Lancaster's voice, "That bitch Winters." My ears perked up. I glanced over at him. He was talking on his cell phone, one ear blocking out the noise of the party. I tried to follow the conversation, but only heard one side. I committed what I did here to memory. It sounded like they were trying to maneuver Mom into a no-win situation. He finished up and hung up. I replayed the conversation in my head to get it right. Then Paris appeared, peeking nervously at her father from behind the bookcase, muttering, "Shit, shit, shit," under her breath. "What's wrong, Paris?" She looked at me with a lost expression. Some jerk I've never seen before got handcuffed to the post on my bed, and whoever did it took his pants. I stifled a laugh. If only I had a camera. Paris hissed at me, "This isn't funny. If my dad finds out, he'll lock me in my room for the rest of my life. He let me throw this party as a bet. He bet that something like this would happen. If he finds out, not only will I never throw another party, but I promised I'd stop seeing Lex." Okay, now that wasn't funny. My brief experience with Griff made me way too sensitive to the idea of having a boyfriend you couldn't talk about with your parents. All right, don't panic. Who else knows about this? Just Della, April, and that bitch Pris. She's the one who cuffed the idiot and talked April into getting him up there in the first place. All right, how cool is April? Paris did a half-hearted wave with her hand. SOSO. Well then, she won't want to get on the headmaster's bad side. We can trust her to keep her mouth shut. I'll go get the guys. Wait, it won't look good for 3 guys and a girl to go up the front stairs. Talk about a rep you don't want. Is there a back stair? Yeah, through the back kitchen. You handle your dad, I'll grab Lex and Griff, and we'll figure this out. Paris shot me a look that said I just made a new best friend, then I headed back into the living room. I found Griff, who immediately put a protective arm around my waist. "Wanna dance some more, Ethan?" "I'd love to, but something's come up." "Where are Lex, Stu, and Trevor?" He shrugged. "Oh, they're around. Round them up and meet me in the kitchen. It's Mission Impossible time. Don't let anyone get too interested in you." I broke my own rule and gave him an impulsive peck on the cheek before heading for the kitchen. The kitchen was one of those grand old 19th century spaces built to cook for an entire staff. Domestic help was cheap back then and had been gradually converted over the years. I found the back stairs and waited for the guys when I saw him. It was that jerk from the park, Ambrose. He smirked at me, holding a can of beer in his hand. Well, fancy running into you here. He took a swig from the can and pressed me against the wall. And no boyfriend to hide behind now. Listen, Buck, this isn't the time for this. Oh, it sure is, sweet cheeks. He ran a hand up my thigh, and I felt my skin crawl. Then we heard Griff's voice behind him. You know, Ambrose, this is starting to become a habit. And there was Griff, with his 3 buddies at his back. I had a total, my hero, moment and looked up at Buck. Listen, Ambrose, the only reason I'm not letting them take you outside and shove that can up your ass is that Paris is walking a fine line with this party. So why don't you take your little can of beer and go somewhere it might actually impress someone? I hear the elementary school is putting on a play, maybe try your luck there? Buck pulled his arm back from where he had me pinned, put on what dignity he could muster, and swaggered out the back door. Asshole, I muttered, and motioned for the guys to follow me up the stairs. On the 2nd floor, I spotted Della just as she was slipping into a room. That had to be where the party was. I got us past her with a few casual words about helping out. And there, chained to the post on Paris's bed, wearing only his boxers and shoes, was my old buddy Benny. I turned to Griff and gestured to Benny. You know him? Griff shrugged. I think I've seen him around. Doesn't look like he goes to Tolbathy. Della chimed in, I met him a couple of days ago, his name's Ben. He says he goes to Prothero. He told Paris he was invited, but she says she's never seen him before. Benny just sat there, torn between being angry at being tricked by a couple of goony girls and being embarrassed to be seen by strangers in his underwear. Oh, come on, he whined. Get me out of this before her dad gets up here. I turned to Della. Della, go find that Pris chick and get his pants back. If we can get him out of the cuffs, it won't matter if we can't get him down the stairs without his pants. Someone will notice. Della made a sad face and shook her head. No good. If I know Pris, she tossed them as soon as she had the chance. The guys tried to slip Benny's hand out of the cuffs, but no luck. Stu thought the post might have a removable knob, but it just rotated without coming off. Griff studied the cuffs for a long moment. If Pris is the wise ass she seems to be, she wouldn't let herself get into a situation where she couldn't talk her way out of it by claiming he could have gotten out any time he wanted to. I'll bet these are those trick magician's cuffs. He felt around the cuff and found a hidden catch. And with a satisfying click, the bar of the handcuff swung open. Voila! Griff exclaimed, making a dramatic gesture. I rewarded him with a quick kiss on the cheek. But getting Benny out was still a problem. He looked out the window but quickly realized it was too high up, with no convenient tree or trellis to climb. Looking at his skinny legs, I got a nasty idea. Della, have you stayed over here? Yeah, a couple of times. I visit often enough. Good. Griff, you and the others go out into the hall and act like you're waiting to use the upstairs bathroom. Let us know if anyone's coming. Bozo, you stay here. I've got an idea. 5 minutes, and a lot of whining later, Della and I had Benny dressed in a skirt, a bulky sweater, and a shaggy blonde wig that Della promised Paris wouldn't miss. We didn't bother with makeup, since there was no way Benny could pass if anyone looked closely. We just needed something that would fool a quick glance, which was all we were aiming for. We'd get him down the back stairs, through the kitchen, and out the back door, where Benny could take it from there. Just as we were about to make our move, we heard something in the hall. Mr. Curtis, what are you doing up here? Mr. Lancaster asked in his best headmaster voice. To his credit, Lex didn't seem intimidated. Hey, Mr. A. Just doing what everyone does at a party sooner or later, waiting for the plumbing to open up. He thumped on the bathroom door a few times. Come on. What are you doing in there? And what are they doing? Keeping you company? Stu jumped in. No, just asking the same darn question. Hurry up. Somehow, I don't think Stu's comment was meant for whoever was in the bathroom. Mr. Lancaster muttered, I don't have time for this childishness. And he stormed toward Paris's room, pounding on the door. Paris! Open up! I cracked the door. I'm sorry, Mr. Lancaster, but Paris isn't in here right now. If you'll excuse me, we've got a bit of a crisis on our hands. He glared through the crack. I've been informed that Paris has let a boy into her room, against my explicit orders. I intend to see for myself. I smiled sweetly. Believe me, Mr. Lancaster, you can trust your daughter. I give you my word, there is no boy in this room tonight. My informant says there is a boy in there, and he has no clothes on. Do you have a boy in there, young lady? I shot him a sharp look. Sir, what kind of girl do you think I am? I opened the door wide and Della and I helped Benny out. Benny was bent over, trying to hide his face without making it obvious. I turned back to Lancaster and said coldly, go ahead and look, but I can assure you, there are no boys in this room now. He looked down at Benny, hanging awkwardly between Della and me. What's the matter with her? Ah, female troubles. I smiled, she really shouldn't have come tonight. Della and I hauled Benny toward the back stairs while Mr. Lancaster barged into Paris's room to investigate. Just as we were about to hit the bottom of the stairs, I saw a flash of light, a Polaroid camera, with April and Pris standing there, snapping a picture. Shit. This could blow everything, Benny, Paris, and me. I'd heard that glamour only shows up in fashion magazines. That snapshot could show two boys in girls' clothes. Benny might have an explanation, an embarrassing one, but still rational. But if anyone saw me in that picture, I was toast. Benny blocked the kitchen door before April could get through, Della covered the back door, and I moved toward Pris. Pris grabbed the photo and tossed the camera at me. Reflexively, I caught it and let Pris slip past me. She bolted toward the back door, and I cursed under my breath as I chased after her. Her blonde hair was barely visible in the growing darkness, and she was at least 20 yards ahead. I'd been running on fumes, but I dug deep and put a little extra energy into my sprint. Witches have a technique called wings unto my feet, which is mostly used to escape witch hunters. It gave me a burst of speed, and I closed the gap just as she rounded a hedge with a laugh. I rounded the corner and almost ran straight into Buck and his two friends. What, is everyone I don't like lining up to get in my way tonight? Is Cole Peslow and his crew next? Buck had found another beer and was hanging out. He saw me coming and got ready to start trouble again. As he stepped into my path, I shouted, "Get out of my way, loser," and shoved him to the ground without breaking my stride. Pris was heading toward the main building, trying to put another hedge between us. The wings onto my feet technique, used for running in some rituals involving high jumps, often with sticks in hand, was the basis for the classic witch on a broom image. I used it to leap over the hedge and get ahead of Pris. She didn't see me coming, and I managed to throw her to the ground. Out of breath, I gasped at her, "Okay, bitch, give me the picture." She clutched it to her chest. "Screw you. Hand it over, or I'll kick." I glanced down at my platform shoes. They weren't built for heavy running, and only the magic I'd been using kept them from falling apart. "Look at my shoes. They're ruined." Now she was scared and quickly handed me the snapshot. "It was just a joke," she said, her voice small. As I limped back to the party on my ruined platforms, I started to rip up the snapshot. But as I held it, I took a closer look. The photo showed Della, Benny in his half-ass drag, and me. Not Dan in drag, but me, the pretty 15-year-old girl. The positioning was all wrong, and the lighting was horrible, but I looked pretty damn good. But why was the glamour showing on a cheap Polaroid? I pondered that on my way back. Flushed with victory, I didn't notice Buck and his buddies until I got back to where they had been. They were gone, and Griff and his crew were there, looking like they'd been in a fight. I approached them. "Hey, guys! What happened?" Stu looked up, a satisfied grin on his face. "That guy came running after you, ran into Buck and his pals. They started pounding on him, so we stepped in to, keep the peace. Can't let a bunch of punks mess up Paris's party, right?" I bit my lip. I think I pissed them off when I blew past them chasing Pris. "Sorry." Lex grinned. "No worries. That was coming down the road anyway. Did you get the photo?" I held up the Polaroid. "Got it." Griff pulled me into a big hug. I looked around. "Where's the bozo in the dress?" Griff shrugged. He took off as soon as we got Buck and his homies off him. We went inside to enjoy the last bit of the party. When Paris heard what I'd done, she loaned me a pair of low-heeled pumps in my size to replace my ruined platforms. She even let me keep the Polaroid, but only on the condition it never surfaced at Durward. At 9:45, my departure time, Griff and I were dancing to a slow song. At least, I think it was slow dancing. Who cares? Griff walked me from Paris's house to the trolley stop. As the streetcar pulled up, I leaned in to give him a peck on the cheek. He intercepted my face with both hands and held it. Then he leaned in and kissed me. He kissed me. It's such a simple phrase, but when he kissed me, it set my lips on fire. The heat surged through my whole body and short-circuited my brain. I squeaked and melted into the kiss. We stood there until the trolley bell snapped us out of it. I looked at Griff, and he looked at me, both of us wondering, what the hell was that? The trolley conductor called, "Well, kids, are you gonna get on or not?" In a daze, I paid my fare and stepped onto the car. I waved a little goodbye to Griff and watched him walk off, barely seeming to feel the pavement beneath his feet. Geez, I hope he didn't walk into anything. When I got home, yes, I remembered to change clothes. It wasn't that good of a kiss. I was 15 minutes late. I could have snuck upstairs without my parents hearing me, but I decided to be bold. I walked into the living room, where Mom and Dad were on the couch watching a soap commercial. "Mom, Dad, I know I'm late, but I have a really good reason." I recounted Mr. Lancaster's one-sided conversation. I was at the party, and just happened to overhear Mr. Lancaster, the headmaster over at Durward Academy. Mom was too busy thinking about the implications of what I'd heard, and Dad was eager to get back to watching the soap commercial, so they forgot to reprimand me. Knowing when to quit while I was ahead, I headed straight to bed. I fell asleep almost instantly, and I dreamt. I don't remember exactly what, but it involved fields of wildflowers, acres of red satin, a unicorn, and a fire that started at my lips and spread throughout my body. Sunday was church, then my role-playing game group, as usual. The best part about gaming with college guys is that they know nothing about the fool's cap, and even if they did, they wouldn't care. I was tempted to skip the game and go look for Griff, but I decided it was better to keep my head level. Something as intense as that kiss must be respected, even feared. Still, I couldn't help thinking about it as we stormed the Leash King's castle. Monday morning arrived, as it always does. I avoided the usual smog-belching hellhole the school board calls a bus by biking to school. It's an extra half hour, but worth every pedal stroke. The teasing started up again, like nothing had changed since Saturday. For most kids at Horace Mann, it hadn't. At lunch, I overheard Benny bragging about the wild Durward party he'd been to on Saturday. With his usual flair for creative fiction, he turned being handcuffed to a bedpost with no pants into a heroic escape from a girl's room after her father barged in. The other guys tried to get more details, but the bell rang, and they scattered for class. In the hallway, I caught him alone. Hey, Benny. He looked at me like I just kicked his dog. What do you want, dork? I smiled at the insult and said, be careful what you say, Styles. It might come back to bite you. I handed him a Xerox of the Polaroid. The quality wasn't great, but it was clear enough to see Benny, dressed in a skirt and wig. How did you get your hands on this? I smiled coldly. I was by Durward Academy on Saturday night. Heard there was a kick-in party. I saw a couple of blonde girls chasing each other in the dark, and well, in all the confusion, I managed to snap this. Benny's face went pale, and he started hyperventilating. What do you want? Come on, we're best friends. Yeah, as long as it suits you. But, nope, I don't want anything from you, Benji. Friends like you, I can do without. I tore up the Xerox, then added, just remember, I've still got the original, safely tucked away. So, back off. As I walked to science class, I realized I could have squeezed Benny harder with that Polaroid. But I'd already gotten my revenge. Time to leave it, and him, in the past. By not making a big deal out of it, I'd gotten the best kind of revenge. Benny knew I could have ruined him, and I didn't. Living well isn't the best revenge, proving you're better than those who dump on you is. Mom! Dan's playing with fire. Trey, my little brother, was doing his best to rat me out, again. His yell startled me so much that the little ball of Ignis Fati floating between my hands flickered and almost died. I refocused and nudged the flame back into full blaze. This exercise was supposed to be easy once you got the hang of it, but until you did, it was a real pain. I was trying to keep the will-o'-the-wisp alive as long as possible. My best time so far was 3 minutes. I wanted to check the timer, but the little alarm had distracted me enough that I wanted to stabilize it first. So, I refocused on the flame, just as Mom stuck her head in the door. Ethan! Are you? Oh! She froze when she saw the fireball. Slightly annoyed by the constant interruptions, I asked, can you check the timer on the nightstand? How long has it been? She walked over and checked. 6 minutes, 17 seconds. Cool. I beat the 5-minute mark. Oh, then you're done with this? She poked the center of the ball with her finger and pulled it from my hands. The blue flame danced on her fingertip like a candle's flame. Mom! I was working with that. Nonsense. Once you beat the 5-minute mark, that's all you need for today. She turned to leave, the flame still burning from her fingertip. But it'll be perfect for something I'm working on. No one takes me seriously. I trotted after her. In the hall, Trey was waiting, grinning mischievously. So, what are you gonna do to Dan, huh? Huh? The little rat. Mom smiled down at Trey with a reassuring expression. I'm not doing anything to him, sweetie. He didn't do anything wrong. He wasn't playing with fire. This is Ignis Fati, witch fire, or fool's fire, depending on who you ask. It's the distilled essence of glamour. Creating a ball of Ignis Fati is a standard exercise in wizardry. It's bright, but not hot, it can't burn you or catch anything on fire, so it's perfectly safe to work with indoors. But it can hurt you if you expect it to, simply because your mind makes you believe it will. She gave me a sharp look. So, don't be throwing balls of fool's fire at your little brother, got it? I nodded. The look of disappointed confusion on Trey's face, as I skipped the usual scolding, was payback enough for me. As we walked downstairs, I asked, so, what are you planning to use the Ignis Fati for, Mom? Well, I've got a funding meeting tonight, and I thought it would be best to be fully prepared. We headed into Mom's workshop in the cellar. Dad's workshop is in the gardening shed, next to the still. She grabbed a vial of clear blue liquid and dropped the ball of witchfire into it. The liquid swirled, then turned amber. Perfect! I thought I'd wear a perfume that influences people to be more reasonable. Mom, isn't that the same perfume you wore to the last 3 funding meetings? Yes, and? Aren't those the meetings that ended in deadlocks? Didn't you say the last one almost turned into a fight between Mr. Enderby and Ms. Sorensen? Yes, I know. But I'm sure this new version will. She went off into a detailed explanation that would have put Mr. Spock to sleep. I interrupted her. Mom, just a thought. The point of the perfume is to make people more reasonable, right? But are you sure your positions are actually reasonable? You always say politics is less about who's right and more about who wins. So if you wear a perfume that makes people reasonable, but you act unreasonably, doesn't that create a conflict? Doesn't that make everyone think they're being reasonable when really they're all being unreasonable? Wouldn't that piss them off? And, by the way, the parameters of grace say the rule of intent will make your real motivation influence the working and alter it to fit your true intentions. Mom stared at me, speechless. But I have to get this funding. So be reasonable about it. Or leave the perfume at home. She looked at me exasperatedly as I left the cellar. I was already out the door before I did my little victory dance. Yes. Getting one over on your parents is the best. The real issue with outsmarting yourself is that at the time, it seems like you're outsmarting someone else. At Horace Mann Elementary, I'd been using the fool's cap as a kind of danger sense to avoid the usual troublemakers. After school, I'd switch to female mode. Since the fool's cap was tied to Dan, not Ethan, nobody could find me. I used my bike to avoid the school bus, which was nothing short of a mobile hell. So far, so good. But I forgot what the fool's cap does, aside from giving me grief. It provides others with someone to vent their frustration on. Since I'd been avoiding them, they hadn't had an outlet for their anger until now. I was heading to the bike rack at the end of the school day, excited about my new outfit tucked in my backpack and looking forward to the afternoon with Griff and his friends. As usual, I'd waited in the library until the school bus left. Hey, if it worked for Hannah Romney back in the 1920s, who was I to argue? But when I reached the bike rack, I found that some jerk had locked my bike with one of those kryptonite motorcycle locks. I tried a few experimental tugs, sighed in frustration, and turned to head for the office. So much for an afternoon with Griff. But the front door was locked. I walked around to the side, then realized this wasn't just some expensive prank, it was strategy. Cole Peslow and his goon squad, Reed Wallace and Arnie Gannon, were waiting for me, well out of sight of any adults. Hey, wuss boy, what's wrong? Lose the rock you were hiding under? After that, it quickly became standard harassment technique number 5, so I won't bore you with the details. You know how it goes, just fill in the blanks if you need to. What started as the usual harassment escalated quickly. As I mentioned before, they were all in withdrawal from their usual aggression outlet. It ended with me on the ground, getting kicked in the ribs and spat on. I'm not sure what was worse, getting beat up, having everyone watch, or listening to them cheer. Eventually, the whole thing was broken up when someone shouted that a teacher was coming. Mr. Hawes, the math teacher, helped me to the nurse's office. She checked to make sure I didn't have any broken bones or internal injuries, then sent me to the vice principal's office. That's when things took a turn for the worse. Ms. Sorensen, the vice principal, coldly informed me that she had information suggesting that I had started the fight. Fight? You called that a fight? I got jumped. 3 guys beat the crap out of me, and you're calling it a freaking fight? Mr. Winters, just because your mother is on the school board doesn't mean you're exempt from the rules that apply to everyone else. I was told by someone who was there that you waited for the other boys and repeatedly insulted them. I waited for them? I've been biking to school to avoid them on the bus. The only reason I'm still here is because they slapped a motorcycle lock on my bike. Oh. She got up and looked out the window at the bike rack. It's not there now. They took it off after they jumped me. Those locks aren't cheap, you know. So you say. But I have no reason to believe you. Are you calling me a liar? I'm saying that you have 2 weeks of detention for fighting. Starting now. She led me to the detention room, where Cole, his buddies, and everyone else I'd been avoiding were waiting for me. You know, in the past, the fact that Mr. Selby, the teacher on duty, would leave the room for 10-minute stretches didn't bother me much. The only silver lining was that, while I tried to avoid looking at Cole's smirk, I happened to glance out the window and saw Rhys Aubrey riding his bike home, with a kryptonite motorcycle lock sticking out of his backpack. Looking back, it made perfect sense that it was Rhys. Cole and his friends weren't clever enough to pull off the motorcycle lock prank. And Rhys, being an Aubrey, naturally had his own reasons for making my life miserable. The Aubreys and my mother's family, the Walthers, have never gotten along, no shootings or curses, thank goodness, but a lot of bad blood. Plus, Rhys has what Paris Lancaster would call a rather unfortunate sense of humor. I prefer to call him a wise ass. When I got home, the hits kept coming. Mom let out a yowl when she saw my face, and Trey eagerly informed her that I had a month of detention for fighting. After hearing I'd been beaten, humiliated, tried, sentenced without a hearing, and accused of lying, Mom sent me to my room without dinner. I was in my room, contemplating the peaceful life of a hermit in the back hills, when I heard a knock. Mom poked her head in. Are you accepting visitors, or are you still sulking? Come back in 5 minutes, I'm halfway through a great sulk and I don't want to ruin it. Time flies. First of all, I want to apologize. This got my attention. Mom apologizing is as rare as a blue moon. Ms. Sorensen called and told me her version of why you got so much detention. From the way she tried to make it sound like I was raising John Wayne Gacy, I can't imagine she gave you anything like a fair hearing. Then, she tried to use the threat of expelling you as leverage in our negotiations. I perked up. If Mom pulled me out of Horace Mann to avoid an expulsion on my record, she might send me to an out-of-town boarding school, which meant I could escape the fool's cap. If there was any justice in the world, Rhys Aubrey would end up wearing it instead. But Mom wasn't having any of that. When she threatened to expel you, I pointed out that I could dispute this before the school board. And, considering there were 5. It was only 3, and at least a dozen witnesses. 3 guys beating the crap out of you and walking away scot-free? It wouldn't take Perry Mason to turn that into a case of political harassment. I can't get you out of detention, though, that would look like preferential treatment. But, the detention is only until Friday. After all, it was just a fight, and you were on the receiving end. I still wasn't happy. That back called me a liar. I can't do anything about that. And kids telling tall tales is just part of her job. She kissed me on the forehead and added, "This will all blow over." After she left, I locked the door and grabbed my hairbrush. I weaved the glamour into my female form. But, looking at myself like that wasn't comforting, it just reminded me I wouldn't be able to hang out with Griff and his friends. And that was the one thing keeping me sane with all the hazing I was dealing with lately. I slogged through the week in detention. If I had built up karmic debt with all the tricks at Paris Lancaster's party, I was back in the black by Friday. Saturday morning, I was out of the house the second my cartoons ended, biking into town. I just hoped I could explain my absence to Griff without stretching the truth too much. I changed in the second-floor restroom of the public library. It was the best way to lose anyone who might be following me. Then, I checked out the comic book store since it was new comic release day. Griff, Stu, Lex, and Trevor were there. I slipped into the store while they were discussing the latest issue of Aegis. I grabbed the new issues of Lady Lightning, Tigress, and Power Woman. They finally noticed me when I went to pay at the counter. "Hey, Ethan. Where have you been?" Detention all week. Then I had to get home right after, you know how it goes. "What did you do?" "Nothing. I got set up." They pulled me into the discussion about Aegis, and I steered the conversation out of the store. I even convinced them to head to the soda Fontainebleau, where Griff treated me to one of those frilly parfait things as we talked. Honestly, they taste better when someone else is paying. Afterward, we walked around Old Town and ran into Paris and Della. Paris paired off with Lex, and Della with Stu, leaving poor Trevor once again the odd one out. I wondered if there was something I could do for him without making a big deal out of it. Still, he seemed okay with it. Della insisted we go into the local record store to see what was new. Paris, Della, and I were off on our own, comparing Backstreet Boys to NSYNC, arguing over which group had cuter members. Or at least, that's what they were doing. Personally, I thought those guys were totally lame, regardless of male or female mode. Then, someone grabbed the back of my top, and I felt something squirmy fall down my back. Naturally, I freaked out and jumped up and down to shake it off. After a few frantic wiggles, a plastic spider fell out. I turned around to see who'd done it and saw Reese Aubrey laughing. "You!" I hissed, "You creep!" I stopped his laughter with a sharp slap to the face. Griff appeared out of nowhere. "Ethan, are you okay?" This jerk put a spider down my back. Griff glared at Reese, who just waved him off. "Hey, it was just a plastic spider. A joke." I didn't know she had a boyfriend. Trust Reese to twist the situation, so I ended up on the spot. I just blushed and said nothing, while Griff took my arm and led me out of the store with a final glare at Reese. Reese was giving me a weird look. This definitely didn't bode well. On Monday, I biked to school again, this time carrying a tube of metal epoxy. If Reese was planning to pull the motorcycle lock trick again, I just squirt some epoxy in the lock, making it cost him that lock. I even took the seat and front wheel off, in case he decided to switch things up. All that preparation, and Reese didn't do anything. Not unless he was the one who put the padlock on my locker. But, when the janitor came with the bolt cutters, it was still there. Reese would have removed it, just to annoy me. At the end of the school day, my bike was still there, more or less untouched. I figured Reese decided it was too obvious to mess with my bike again. Cole and his goons weren't about to give up on me. They tried to follow me on their bikes, but I lost them with a little magic. I did my change in the public library again and went looking for my new crew. Instead, I ran into Paris and Della. We indulged in some classic girl bonding, drooling over dresses in shop windows that were way too expensive for us, even if we could afford them. After a while, we bumped into Griff and Stu, and we hung out with them for a bit. We spent some time just goofing off, and eventually, as it was time for me to head home, Griff walked me to the trolley stop. We waited for a few minutes, and as the trolley turned the corner, Griff took my face in his hands and kissed me. It wasn't as electrifying as the first kiss, but nothing really compares to that first one, right? Even so, the trolley had to wring us out of our moment. I got on and rode to the library, grinning like an idiot. When I got to the library, I saw with horror that Reese Aubrey had locked my bike with a motorcycle lock. Why couldn't that jerk just leave me alone? I shook the lock, and a flash of light caught my attention. I spun around to find Reese holding a pocket camera, grinning like an idiot. Well, look at you. Don't you look pretty? Somehow, he managed to make pretty sound like an insult. He swaggered up to me and circled around. Nice outfit, Winters. Not as nice as the one you were wearing at the record store, but still, not bad. I gave him a disgusted look. Oh, it's you. Spider Boy. He waggled his eyebrows. Oh, trying to play it cool, huh? Going to pretend you don't know what I'm talking about, and scream for the cops any second now? Okay, I can respect that. Takes guts, Winters. More guts than I thought you had. He looked me up and down. But there's so much more to you than I ever imagined. My heart was pounding in my chest. My worst nightmare was coming true. I'd been found out, and by the absolute worst person possible. But I tried to keep my composure. Lovely. More jokes. What's next? Run out of fake blood and plastic vomit? He leaned in close. You can bluff all you want, Dan. Oh, that's right, your name's not Daniel, it's Ethan, isn't it? Well, Ethan, my family's been in the craft as long as yours has. I know a glamour when I see one. And I'll give you credit, this is a hell of a job, Winters. I didn't catch on when I first saw you in the record store. But you blew it, girly boy. You recognized me, and I knew I'd never met the cute chick you look like. So, I checked you out. I didn't realize that the nerd I was following and the mystery lady I was watching were the same person. Not until Dan the dork went into the library and little Miss X came out 5 minutes later. I gave him a pitying look. Do you realize how insane you sound? He wasn't bothered. Play it that way, Winters. I know you went into the library because I've been following the fool's cap. And you know what, Winters? While it may be weaker when you're like this, it's still there. Your fag friends don't know it, but you're still fair game for anything. Once these pictures of you walking around in a dress and kissing a guy hit the streets, you'll be lucky if you survive long enough to explain it to your mom. And we both know glamours don't show up on film. He didn't know about the photos from Paris Lancaster's party, and I wasn't going to fill him in. His evidence wouldn't stick, but he had me cornered. If I told him, he'd just dig up something else to use against me. He had the rope, and he was twisting it into a knot. But I still had to get him up on a chair. I wasn't worried, he wanted something from me, or he wouldn't have let me know. He could have caught me off guard, but he didn't. I folded my arms across my chest and tilted my head. Okay, Reese, you've got me. So, what are your terms? He ran his hand through his spiked-up red hair, smirking as he checked me out. I finally understood what girls meant when they said guys made them feel like a piece of meat. I haven't figured it out yet. I have an idea, but I need some time to fine-tune it. In other words, he needed time to think of something disgusting. He turned to leave, but I grabbed his arm. Before you go, Aubrey, there are 3 things you need to understand. First, I can't do whatever you have in mind if these photos ever see the light of day. My mom will probably send me to live with my Aunt Dell in Philadelphia if anyone sees me as a boy in a dress. So no fun for you. I suggest you don't develop those prints. Why not? Nobody's ever going to see them, girly boy. Knowing how cheap you are, Aubrey, you're probably planning on using Photomat or some other low-budget developer. The lab workers always check the envelopes, hoping to find something exciting like amateur porn. If you send those photos there, they'll be all over the place by Sunday. Reese scowled but couldn't argue with my logic. I couldn't help but feel I had gained the upper hand here. Second, if I'm going to do whatever you have in mind, I need some breathing room. I can't have Cole Peslow and his lackeys hovering over me. Back off with the gags. I can't expect you to stop the Peslow crew, but you can stop giving them tips and warn me if they plan anything. He sneered, if I hear they're trying to decapitate you, I'll let you know. Third, get this damn lock off my bike. I need to get home for dinner. As Reese fumbled with the key, I pulled out a tube of metal epoxy. When the lock was off, I quickly applied the epoxy inside the mechanism and snapped the hasp shut. I mounted my bike and cheerfully called, "See ya, Reese," as I pedaled off. Reese was too busy swearing and trying to unstick the lock. At least I didn't have to worry about that trick again. The next day, Reese caught up with me by my locker between classes. "You owe me for the cost of that motorcycle lock." "Yeah? Try and collect. You're not very cooperative, for someone who's one photo development away from total ruin. Reese, it occurs to me that if you let those photos circulate, you'll be cutting your own throat, too. Think about it. If the photos come out, there'll be questions about how I pass so easily in person but look so obvious on film. The coven will clean it up, but trust me, they won't be happy with the fool who broke the cardinal rule, thou shalt not give away the show. I'll be in trouble, but you? Your family will come down on you like a ton of bricks to show everyone they weren't involved. And if I get hurt? Your mom will tie you to a stake while mine piles on the wood. You might as well burn those negatives now while no one else has seen them. Yeah, you're right. I can't let those hit the streets, but I could always pass them to Ms. Sorensen and let her use them to ruin your mom. Give the guy credit, he knew where to strike. Too bad for him, though, the gun he was pointing at my mom had no bullets. But I couldn't let him know that yet. First, I needed to find out what he wanted and then use it against him. Enough with the sparkling banter. What do you want in exchange for that roll of undeveloped photos? He glanced around. Not here. I don't want people seeing me with you. Might catch something. How about after school? You put on one of your pretty outfits and meet me at Burger King at 4 o'clock? And why do you think I'd want to be seen with you, Aubrey? My other identity has a reputation to maintain. He sneered. Yeah, and a boyfriend. Jealous? Just be there. Like it or not, I showed up at the Burger King at the scheduled time, dressed in my striped jersey and jumper, irritated that I was wasting it on someone like Reese Aubrey. Fortunately, the BK wasn't part of my usual hangout with Griff and the crew, so I didn't have to worry too much about being seen there.